So welcome everybody to the latest Jodo webinar, this time with Language Angels. I'm absolutely delighted that Paolo and Francesca have agreed to talk us through Language Angels, talk about progression in primary languages. Today is the 27th of August 2020, and it's amazing that we've got so many people who have registered for this event. At the current time of recording, we have 25 people in the room, but we're expecting many more to join us very soon because we had 160 or something registrants. So without further ado, I would love to hand over to Paolo and Francesca and hear all about Language Angels. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much for this opportunity for us to talk a little bit about Language Angels, about ourselves, and obviously the main focus of the presentation, progression in primary foreign languages. For those of you that don't know us, I'm Paolo, and obviously this is Francesca.
Married?
Yes, we're married. You can tell we're married. She's already interfering and interrupting me. But this is normal. This is what we do generally. So we are going to do this session together. So be prepared for some DIY handovers. We're sat on two chairs, one camera. So you'll see me sliding to the side eventually, and Francesca will come in, and I'll come back in at the end. So I'm going to do the intro. Francesca's going to then take you through how we've designed Language Angels around our approach to progression and what we can do to evidence progression in our teaching every day. And then I'll be back at the end with a brief explanation of how we can evidence and demonstrate progression and how we help our schools do that at Language Angels. And then we'll finish off from there. So let's just, who are Language Angels? I suppose for many people at today's session, many of you might not know who we are. We are a small team, not quite as small as you see here. There are more than two of us. We are a small team completely made up of teachers and linguists. We are real people. That's something we've always put into our webinars because we are an online solution provider. So one of the things about being an online solution provider is it can sometimes make you feel a little remote or a little bit distant from the actual reality of the classroom every day. That isn't the case with us. We work with more than 1,200 schools, predominantly around the UK, but that is expanding geographically now. In fact, just this week we've had schools from Kenya sign up, schools from Australia sign up. We're already with schools in the UAE, and obviously the UK is where our main focus is. And from those 1,200 plus schools that we work with, we have daily regular interaction with a vast number of teachers from those schools all through the year. And what that does is it gives us an awful lot of input, but also a lot of insight to the realities of primary foreign language classrooms direct from teachers on a daily basis. And what we do is we take all of the input, all of the feedback, and we then put it back into the Language Angels resources we provide for our teachers and our schools, so that we provide the most relevant and also the most supportive resources that we possibly can. We have a lot of information coming in, and we feel that our job is to make sure that we share as much of that information back out with all of our users. This session is really for everybody, but it's going to be a particular benefit if you are keen to embed languages in a sustainable way in your curriculum. It's going to be for you if you are keen to demonstrate that you're... Sorry, there's a bit of...
Sorry, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to mute. Mariana, can you turn off your microphone, please?
I think people are still having trouble joining Joe as well.
Okay, hang on. Yeah, Marianne, can you turn off your microphone, please? So I just paused the recording. Hang on. Okay.
Okay. This session is also for you if you want to be able to demonstrate that your pupils, your classes, your school are meeting attainment targets, whatever attainment targets they are, whether you've set them or they've been set for you or they come from government. If you want to be able to demonstrate that those targets are being met, this session is for you. If you want to be able to demonstrate and evidence that how that progression is happening in your classes with your pupils, this session is for you. And I suppose most importantly for the teachers that are with us, if you are keen to make sure that you can do all of these things regarding progression and language teaching, but do it in a way that is enjoyable and stress-free for pupils and for teachers, which is very important, then this session is for you. What are we going to cover? As I said a little bit earlier, I'm just doing the beginning part, and a bit of an introduction. Francesca is then going to take you through in detail how we have structured and developed our resources so that we automatically build progression into all of the teaching that you do. And Francesca's going to go through in detail 2 of our units. One from the beginning of the language learning journey, probably depending on where you teach languages or when you teach languages in your school. I suppose for the majority it will be the beginning of Key Stage 2. And I'm also going to compare and contrast that with a unit from the very end of the journey, from our progressive unit teaching type, which is our most challenging set of resources. And Francesca's going to show you how we build progression into a lesson, into a unit, and then also how that progression develops as we step up the level of challenging across what we call teaching types, which we'll cover also. I ought to say at this stage that our resources are obviously developed around the English programme of study from the DFE, but all of the stuff we're going to discuss and show you here today and during this session is applicable to whichever languages you teach, and to enable you to meet whichever attainment targets you have set either for yourself or had set for you. So everything's applicable and transferable and relevant to what you do. Okay. The other thing I need to say is that we're going to be demonstrating French resources, but again, it's applicable to all languages that you teach. Probably the easiest place to start is from what we're seeing in our schools. Obviously, the last few months have been quite challenging and very different, very intense. But what we have noticed is we've had an awful lot of contact with lots more teachers in these past few months than previously. And lots of teachers have spent the time trying to make sure that what they're doing and what they're planning going forward is exactly what they want to deliver. And a lot of the conversations we've had have centered around progression, which is why we thought this would be a good topic for today's session. And one of the key things that teachers have always raised with us is, okay, I understand the concept of progression. How do I build that into what I'm teaching? And how can I demonstrate that progression is taking place? And those 3 bullet points at the bottom of this slide are the 3 key areas they've always raised. So should I focus on assessment? Should I focus on attainment targets? And what about skills? And Francesca now is going to come on and she's going to deal with how we approach progression at Language Angels. And I'll give you a quick sneak preview of the answer. Skills at the bottom there are quite important. So again, I'll hand over to Francesca. I'm going to slide to the right and then...
Yes, because I need more room.
She needs more room.
I need more room.
And I'll be back in a bit.
So hi everybody, lovely to be here and great that you've all joined us this evening. I'm going to try not to go off topic because I have a habit of chit-chatting away. I feel like we're all friends, we're in a room. And you'll hear Paolo say to me, time, time, time. And if any questions...
It's my job.
It's your job.
Yeah.
If any questions come up, just fire them over. Joe's already kindly said that. If anything comes through here, let us know because obviously we want to answer your questions. So let's start with progression. So as Paolo said, we have never had as much contact with teachers as we've had in the last few months. And although the whole COVID situation has just been horrendous, in terms of teachers coming together and sharing good practice and knowledge and wanting to help each other, it has been very humbling actually. But one of the questions that we've been asked, as Paolo highlighted, was to do with progression. And obviously progression is the key word because whatever we do, whether it be learn a language or a hobby or a skill, if we're going to spend time on it, any period of time, we want to see progress. We want to see us moving on in that skill. And with languages, especially if it's being delivered, for example, in primary schools, as can happen by non-specialist delivery, or a specialist it can be quite hard to understand what progression actually is. And the question that we get is, how should we evidence progression? Because everything at the moment is about evidence and documentation and data. But actually, I think we need to step back from what we need to evidence and actually understand the word progression. So, I mean, you all know what progression means, but I've taken time to look it up in a dictionary. Progression is developing or moving gradually towards a more advanced state or a number of things in a series. And that's where Language Angels steps in. For us, it's more than about the progression. It's about taking the progression and breaking it down and understanding exactly what it looks like. We need to think, what can the children actually do? So we're teaching our pupils, we're following a scheme of work, we've got a textbook, whatever method of delivery you're using, you need to understand clearly what the children can do before you worry about evidencing the progression. And that's what we're going to talk about today, making these milestones, these benchmarks, that we can then see the progression happening and then decide if we want to measure it. Because I think there's a difference between what it looks like and then measuring it. But until we know what the progression should look like, I think we can't even think about measuring it. So Language Angels is all about providing resources where it's very clear where these little steps are. And progression happens in a lesson, in a unit, over a teaching type, and I'll talk about teaching types in a little bit more detail as we progress through the slides, and at the end of primary phase. Now in the UK, we call it a key stage, it's key stage 2, and we're looking at what happens over a period of time. But what I'm suggesting tonight is that we need to take it right back to a lesson, and we need to look at progressive in a lesson that then builds to progressive in a unit, within a year group, and then a teaching type / key stage. And then we will be able to really build something of worth that the children will see themselves what they can do, because at the end of the day, what we want them to be able to do is communicate, whether that be in listening, reading, writing, or speaking and grammar in the language, and have skills that when they transfer to secondary, for example, they keep with them and they can apply to maybe a second language. Because obviously sometimes the issue we have in the UK, for example, is that the pupils don't always follow on with the second language. So these are all the things that we're going to look at. Now, Paolo's already said that we're going to have a very quick look at our own attainment targets. Now, I know some of you, and it's wonderful, are tuning in from all over the globe. These are being used today just to show you how vague they are, and how actually it's quite hard to show progression using just what the government stipulation is, but we can use those to build a program of study, a scheme of work, and then focus on skills and content. So let's have a really quick look at what they are like to show you how broad they are. Now, as a experienced, let's not talk about age, but as an experienced teacher.
She's very, very young, I promise.
But with loads of experience.
With lots of experience.
And a bilingual speaker, so I was brought up bilingual in Italian. I really like the statements as a resource writer, because it means that I can really apply them to all of our resources. Now, Language Angels did exist, perhaps in a different shape and form, before these attainment targets, but we didn't actually have to change all the resources to match the attainment targets, because resources should be about teaching the pupils the language. So if we have a quick look at, for example, maybe number 1 here, I mean, I've numbered them, there's 12 of them, and this is what we're supposed to use to build our schemes of work and measure progress and assess in key stage 2 in the UK, in England actually specifically, let me use the right terminology. If we look at number 1, for example, listen attentively to spoken language, and I'll show you some resources in a couple of slides, how we've done that. It's very hard to understand what that looks like. So let's go back to talking about what the children can actually do. So wherever you are today, from whichever country, if you were told that you had to teach a scheme of work, use a resource, and show listen attentively to spoken language, my question would be, what does that actually look like? What can the children do? And if I gave you 10 minutes to think about it, of course you could come up with an answer, but would that be the same for a child studying a language in their first year, in their second year, in their third year? So it's quite difficult to use attainment targets on their own to show progression. It's much more complicated, I think, actually, and can be done very easily, but using just attainment targets is not really the answer. And if we look, for example, at number 6, that talks about present ideas and information orally, I always say at this point, what does that mean from a scaffold? Does that mean from memory? And in England, for example, with our 12 attainment targets, number 12, which is my favorite, because those of you that know me know I love grammar, even in primary. Yes, it can be done.
Excuse me.
No, it can.
Everybody loves their grammar.
I don't know, but if you took a poll today,
Okay.
you get a mixed bag. If you look at number 12, for example, does that mean when it's talking about verbs and high frequency verbs, I know what I think a high frequency verb is. I would definitely include my 4 irregulars: to go, to do, to have, to be. I would use verbs that the children, the pupils would want to use: to play, to eat, to drink, to watch, to listen, for example. But we do not have a list of vocabulary. We do not have a list of units. We do not have a list of topics, and we do not have a list of grammar. So it can be quite difficult to build a scheme of work, I think, where the progression happens over a period of time, but it's happening in a lesson, in a unit, across a year group, across a key stage. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Measuring that progression, but ensuring that all of those little steps, the benchmarks, the milestones, whatever terminology you want to use, are built in to what you are teaching. And when you are able to do that, then I believe that you have really strong, solid progression over a period of time. So what we're saying today is, in our case, in England, we have these 12 teaching requirements. They're for the end of Key Stage 2. Now, I don't want to read them to you, because obviously if you're in a different country, they're of no worth, no value, but they're 1 to 12, but they're not progressive. So number 1 is not the easiest and 12 is not the hardest. So for example, I just briefly talked about the grammar, number 12. I believe grammar should start from the very beginning. If not the first lesson, it comes into the second with your nouns and your genders and your articles. And we'll look at how we do that at Language Angels as I come to show you the resources. So I think that whatever resource or whatever you're using to build progression, you have to look very carefully and see where these steps are and how everything is linked together to give the pupils not simply lists of vocabulary, because actually if a pupil can recite words, doesn't matter how many words they know, I would say there's not great progress happening there. There's great memory skills. They're not actually able to do very much apart from regurgitate or recycle, and actually they could look up the vocabulary if required on an online resource or in a reference book, for example. What can your pupils actually do in terms of skills that they can build on to learn a language? So the first questions that you would need to ask yourselves, for example, is whatever attainment targets you're doing or whatever your objectives are for the end of a year or a key stage or particular age group, what do you want the children to be able to do? And are you able to do that with the resource that you're using? So if you're following a particular course, textbook, online resource, do you think the children, the pupils, are going to be able to actually do by the end of a particular period of time? So let's go to Language Angels to show you how this theory works in practice. So at Language Angels, we do not categorize by age. We categorize by level of language, level of challenge. So that's why we're finding that we have a lot of schools, and they're not just British schools, but lots of schools that teach Italian, French, or Spanish outside of the UK are interested in buying into Language Angels because of the way that we organize our resources. So I today have labeled it Year 3 and Year 6. So let me just explain. Year 3 would be the compulsory age that pupils would learn languages. in England. Year 3 is roughly, I would think it's
7 or 8.
7 or 8. Although our resources actually, is there a question coming through?
No questions at the moment.
Are geared to much younger learners. So although I've put a year 3, because that's the first year that they would be expected to learn a language, early learning is actually directed at a pupil who's learning a language for the first time and would be 5 years plus. We're just about to launch our reception and early years material, and maybe we can chat about that at the end. But this would be in the very first years of learning a language. Now, these program of study attainment targets that I briefly talked about, because I just wanted to highlight so you understood what I was trying to explain, are met in our easiest unit, and they're met in our hardest unit. So Me in the World is a progressive unit. You cannot teach our progressive units unless you have covered some of our early learning and intermediate, because the language skills are built in early learning. Paolo likes to call it language Lego. They build basic knowledge of nouns and gender and article, and we do focus on that, so that when they get to intermediate, they can start to make a short phrase from memory. And then when they get to progressive, and we'll show you some of the materials in progressive, they're able to handle extended phrases, unknown language. They've learned how to just listen and read. They know where to go to unravel language, to look up unknown vocabulary. And this can all be done in primary, and we are proving that it can be done with the right methodology and pedagogy, and it has to happen slowly over a period of time. Now, whenever I show this slide, we get questions coming in saying, but surely if you've met them all here, why would you need to meet them again? Well, that's because of level of challenge and stretch. Hence the titles early learning, intermediate and progressive. And by the very fact they are meeting the same attainment target, the same goal, same objective, whatever you want to call it, it means that they are progressing, because they are meeting that same target multiple times, always with an added layer of challenge. And that can be seen, as I'm going to show you very clearly visually, by the resources and what we are expecting the children to do in reading, writing, speaking, listening and grammar, but it can also be measured. And if we have time, Paolo will speak to you briefly about how we allow schools to measure what the children are doing, because I know that lots of you, senior leadership teams, are being requested to provide data and labeling and numbers, and that can be done too if you have obviously the structure in place to be able to do that. So early learning at the very beginning and progressive at the end. Early learning is the easiest, it's fruits. Me in the World is talking about 4 characters, and they are from 4 different French-speaking countries around the globe, and they come together in this unit, and they're talking about who they are, favorite celebrations, feast days, religions, and their place in the world, effectively, as the title says. And it ends with some work on the environment and how they help the environment. But the important thing is that just because you meet an attainment target or an objective doesn't mean that your pupils can actually do anything. So if we want to see progression, we want to watch progression happening, you have to really think about what the end goal is and make little steps towards that end goal, and you need to do it multiple times, and recycling and consolidation, all these buzzwords that are happening all of the time, and that is what creates progression. So I've answered my own questions. Look at that. So we can skip this slide. You'll be happy. So the answer is an attainment target is not enough. We need them to build our resources around. So like I said, in our case here, when we were given the 12 attainment targets, we had to lay all the resources out and decide what was missing, what we could put in. And then you can see where the progression is. And now we go to skills, because if we're talking about seeing progression and making it very clear what we want the children to do, we feel, Paolo and I and the team at Language Angels, and I think our schools would agree, the easiest, the best way to do this is to think of the language skills. So to think of reading, writing, speaking and listening and grammar, which is effectively what you say, any language.
Yeah, I think that those are, you can't learn a language without developing and progressing in those key language learning skills. So speaking, listening, reading and writing underpinned by grammar. And those are the skills which that stick with people. Those are the skills that our young learners, if they're starting in primary, will take forward with them into later education if they continue to study languages. And those are the skills that are transferable between languages also.
Yes.
So without those skills being mastered, developed and progressed, it's very difficult to become a linguist long term.
Yes, and it's not about making primary pupils fluent. I think sometimes we move from one end of the spectrum to the other. Sometimes it's all about fun and just letting them enjoy it, and I'll talk more about that afterwards, because of course we want them to enjoy language learning, but also we have limited time and we haven't got an immersive or a bilingual environment where we can give them copious amounts of language, and of course they would absorb it and speak it. We have very limited time, and when we have limited time in a classroom and the pupils are studying all of the other subjects in the curriculum, which is already overcrowded if we're honest, and we're giving them these half-hour bursts or these hour bursts of language learning, it has to be very targeted, I believe, and very structured, so we make the best use of that time. And when we are clear about what we would like the children to achieve by the end of a lesson, a unit, a year group, and a key stage or particular age, then we can find the best resources, we can have the best teaching, and we will have the best outcomes. When everybody is really clear about what we want the children to achieve, pupils and teachers together, and we have these milestones and these building blocks, and they are crystal clear to everybody in the classroom environment, from the teacher, the TA, the senior leadership, the middle leaders, when everyone's understanding what the curriculum is, then you will see progression, and the pupils will speak in the foreign language. They will write, they will read, they will listen, and they will have basic grammar skills that they can build on when they go to the next phase. So, for example, when we started to think about the attainment targets that we have here, and we thought about skills, we found that we could actually categorize our attainment targets by skill. And when we had decided roughly which attainment target was which skill, then we could sit down and decide how we wanted to break that attainment target down. So going back to number 1, for example, what does listen attentively to spoken language and show understanding mean? On paper, when I am in the classroom, what does that look like for early learning? What does that look like for intermediate? And what does that look like for progressive? We decided to organize the resources like that for lots of reasons. And I'm really glad actually during this horrendous period of COVID that we did that, because we've been inundated with schools actually this week asking about the recovery curriculum and what they should be doing with their classes. And we are saying it really depends what the level of language is. So for example, year 6, which would be the final year of primary here, in an ideal world should be on our progressive units, because ideally they've started lower down in school and they've worked their way slowly through early learning, intermediate, and they've reached progressive. But obviously there hasn't been probably regular teaching as we would have liked. Lots of our schools have actually managed to carry on teaching languages. Some of the new schools, for example, are saying, you know, I think progressive is going to be too hard. No problem. You can start on early learning. You start building those skills. There's no point jumping to something that the children aren't going to be able to manage in terms of challenge. That would be time wasted. At that point, I would say spend that time in another area of the curriculum. We're saying start with early learning. And if you find that they manage early learning, you can move them very quickly on what we call our accelerated curriculum to intermediate. And the final year of primary, I can assure you, many of our schools have finished on a progressive. So we do it by level of challenge and stretch and linguistic ability, so that that class is catered for.
I think
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, actually it applies to this side also. It's the analogy that you can't start building a house from the roof down. You have to start at the bottom and build up. And again, sorry to interrupt this. You're going to come on to that on this slide.
Right, so this is a graphic that we show in all of our webinars. So I think we might have a few people here today that have seen this and probably think, oh, they're bringing it out again. So basically, what this is how we see language learning. And I'm sure that you would all agree that grammar has to underpin everything, even at primary. I told you I liked grammar, and I'm going to talk about grammar a lot. So grammar is here because if the pupils do not understand the basic concepts of the language and how those words come together and what the rules are and how they change, even if they can't do it from memory and they can't do it on their own, as long as they have an understanding when they go to secondary, that will be of huge advantage. Now, I have a colleague in the room today who we taught in a school together many moons ago, and I only found out yesterday that she was taking part, but she would agree because she was with me at the beginning of this journey. When we used to go into primary, it was the explaining of concepts and the unraveling of grammar that we learnt how to do. And we brought that into the secondary, and it had a huge impact on teaching and learning of foreign languages. And all of a sudden, it was like a light bulb moment, and we realized that until you unravel the grammar and you explain it and you practice it and you show the children how it all comes together, they will never be able to read, listen, write and speak on their own. They may be able to repeat things from memory, and they may be able to do that on a variety of topics, but those topics will always live in a separate box, and they will never be able to transfer that knowledge. Now, I'm not talking about complicated grammar, quite the opposite actually. I'm talking about simple grammar done really, really well and done multiple times. So for example, in Language Angels, we have 8 grammatical concepts that we like to explore. We do verb conjugation, and we'll talk about that. I think I've got a slide on one of our units talking about verb conjugation. And we don't do tenses, but we do show the children how the verbs change and how they can make their own sentences when they've understood how the verb changes. And just understanding these concepts in foreign languages, and actually it happens in lots of foreign languages, not just the one that they're learning at primary school, and they will be able to transfer that knowledge. And when this happens, then the progression takes part. Did you want to say something? Just allowing you 2 minutes.
Kind of you to invite me back.
Yeah.
In. Obviously, you've changed the slide now. But anyway, okay, it's fine.
We can go back.
That's fine.
Look, I can go back.
There you go. So it really is, if you like, if grammar is the foundation, then we've got the 4 pillars of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. It's around those foundations and those pillars that linguistic fluency, understanding, and competency develop. Without those, we can be good. We have good memory skills,
which is important.
But we aren't going to be fluent linguists, and we're not going to progress in our language learning. And I've just got a very quick anecdote I want to drop in, and I will pass back to Francesca. We happened to have a chat with an actor in the UK a few years ago, actually. And when we first met him, he arrived at the door and said a really fluent Italian sentence to me. And I was actually quite taken aback because he's an English actor. And I said to him, well, that's really, really good. Do you speak Italian? And he said, no, I'm an actor. I've got really good memory skills, but I'm not a linguist. And there is a distinct difference. And these pillars and that foundation are where that difference lives.
Now you're making it sound like we have actors turn up at the door all the
time.
Going
out once. That's it.
Okay, moving on. So let's have a look at what this progression would look like in the skills at Language Angels. So for this part of the webinar, I am going to stick with fruits and me in the world, because they're one of the easiest and one of the hardest. So it just really shows you what the difference in the progression is. So when you are speaking in the early stages, it is really a very short phrase, but even in the early stages, we like the children to be able to, by the end of the unit, have something that they can show they can actually do. I keep using this word do, but the outcome, what we want the pupils to be able to achieve. So in this unit, which I will talk about in detail, it's a unit about fruit, and it's not just learning lists of vocabulary, because I don't like learning just lists of vocabulary. It is important, but again, it's just working on memory, and that can be done alongside other things. So in this particular unit, a speaking task would be, for example, we would want the children to be able to say what fruits they like, and what fruits they don't like. And obviously within a class, as we mentioned before, not all the children will reach the same level. We aim for them all to get as far as they can. But the reality is that some won't be able to manage what others can. So some of your more competent linguists may be able to tell you lots of fruits they like and they don't like. They might remember all of the 10 fruits. Another pupil may just be able to manage the one phrase, but they will still be able to say what they like and they don't like. When they get to this stage, which would be progressive, roughly speaking about 4 years of language learning, 4 years of very good language learning, very structured, progressive language learning, they would be able to pretend or talk about Sangeeta. Sangeeta is one of our characters. She lives in India and she's talking about Diwali, and they would have had a lesson on that in the foreign language. And what they would be able to do is use that language to create a presentation in written form. Eventually, this is stage 1 where they're doing it in speaking as a pair work activity, and they are learning the questions as well as being able to provide the answers. And here we have a word bank, because in our resources, we have 3 levels of challenge. So depending on what the pupils feel they can do, and sometimes we encourage schools to allow pupils to make the choice to have the 3 options, and they can go for the option that they feel best suits them. Obviously, this is the most popular because should they need it, they have the support there, and the other version would have it obviously removed. And you can see that they've also got extra challenge, and it's much more complicated, but they would be able to manage this task because I've seen it being done. Listening would be a simple task. This could be done on the interactive, especially now with COVID. You don't have to print everything off. It's all on the interactive. Could be done as a class. They could come and do it on the, if they're not coming to the whiteboard, because we're trying to avoid as much contact as possible, depending on your school situations, they could do this on mini whiteboards, and they're simply hearing whether the person on the audio likes or doesn't like. And it is this continual recycling, re-embedding, consolidation of the same vocabulary presented in speaking, listening, reading, writing, in a variety of tasks that will embed the vocabulary into long-term memory, because that's what we want to do with progression. We want it to be long-term. We don't want 4 years wasted. We want them to remember what they've learned, but that will only happen if they repeat and recycle and consolidate, not in a lesson, but over a period of time. As we move to the slide here, they would hear, and they would also have the option of being able to read it, should teachers wish as well, or adults delivering. And then there would be some questions based on that, but you can see there's a lot more text. They would also not have heard all of the language previously, because by the time they get to progressive, we are encouraging them to listen from beginning to end, which I can tell you, having worked in secondary for many years, is extremely difficult for some pupils. They hear one word, they immediately think they have the answer, for example, or they switch off when they don't know what, they don't understand every single word. And we're teaching them that actually you listen from beginning to end, and there will be some words that you don't understand, but hey, there's going to be a lot that you do, and with the words that you do understand, you'll be able to decode. When we're talking about reading, you can see the difference in progression. This is just simply a matching task. We've provided the audio because it really depends what age the children are at for this unit. So for example, if this was a unit that is actually being taught very often in reception in year 1, which are our very first years of primary school here in the UK, their reading skills may be in development. So we allow the listening to take over if the class teachers feel, for example, that they're not ready to be able to read that. And then you can see again that here we have Sangeeta's back, and we have a little gap fill. Some of our readings are comprehensions, but we try and vary the skills and the tasks for the skills as well. So they're not always being asked to do the same thing. And we're asking them to understand this particular vocabulary and decide where it best fits. Underneath here, we've got a writing. Here we've given them the spellings, because for the really young ones, they might still be learning how to actually formulate their letters and their fine motor skills. But for the more challenge, for example, in this worksheet, this whole section would be removed. But there would always be the option of a vocabulary sheet should they know it. And then here we go to the final task in the writing for the Me in the World unit, where we're asking them to do a translation task. And I know some of you are going to think, really? And the answer is yes. There is a translation element in the GCSE. We need to work back. There are things that you can do at primary to help them start to practice these skills. It's age appropriate. They don't have to actually know how to spell the words. They just have to order it. And like I said before, what may seem very difficult or very easy, it's all about building those skills gradually. And sometimes we say, even if it seems really easy, just let the children do the task, because what you feel might be easy might not be easy for them, and they might not understand the processes involved. And by doing these small milestones, these benchmarks, we're starting to build skills. And like we showed you in the graphic, they are all really interlinked. So although I'm saying reading, writing, speaking, in a lesson, you wouldn't just have reading or writing. It's all intertwined, really, but the task would have a focus. We wouldn't tell the children you're just going to do a listening task, but we would know as the staff member delivering the lesson, that would be the skill that we're working on. But there would be a variety in each lesson of these skills working together to help you create progression. And when, for example, in fruits, they've seen the vocabulary in reading, writing, speaking, listening, and they are learning it on the interactive whiteboard material presented, then they will know that language inside out by the time they get to the end of 6 weeks.
That's fantastic stuff. Can I just ask a question, Francesca?
Yeah,
our first question. I did a few minutes ago. I said any questions, so we've got our first question. Oh, second question. Literally just.
Great.
Here we go.
Right.
So first question. So first question, based on I think what you were just saying, really, in relation to combining all the skills together, which is fantastic. So Jocelyn has asked, do they get to listen to the correct text at 100%. The end of the reading or writing?
And yes.
And
all of the audio. In our scheme of work, every single instance of the target language is provided pre-recorded as well. So obviously, I'm guessing from Jocelyn's name, she wouldn't need that support, but where lessons are being delivered by teachers who aren't as confident in the language they're teaching, all of the audio is provided so it can be played and children can model back accurate French pronunciation, Spanish, Italian, whichever language it is that you're teaching. But it is very important that they do get to hear the text, even if it's a writing or a reading exercise, because it's excuse me, it's the repetition of skills and the pairing of skills which helps embed learning and knowledge.
Yes, because you're going to get a pupil, for example, that will read and use their knowledge of, for example, English phonics to, even though they've heard that language, say that you've got a unit of 6 weeks and they're doing, for example, the translation task was a task in week 5 of that particular unit. Even though they've heard, read, seen, you assume that they know how to pronounce those words, and the reality is they probably don't. So you would want to always give the correct version as many times as possible. That's why I've also created the homeschool, so that the children can access and meet this correct language as often as possible. We're trying to imitate, with Language Angels, what we're trying to do is imitate an immersive experience with limited time, if that makes sense, because we can't give them hours and hours and hours and hours, but we do want to surround them with as much accurate language as possible and extended. I don't want to have, even in the early learning, although they start off with single noun and with nouns and articles, they do move to hearing longer text, because that's the reality of language. You're never going to speak just in words. It will be in phrases. I'm talking too much.
No, it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I love the sort of the structure and the progression and the rigor of what you're doing, and the way you're exposing the children to all the different skills. It's just great. There's another more sort of technical question, if that's okay, from Sophie, which is, how many topics or units are covered per year group in a scheme of work? Are there enough lessons to cover one a week or for the whole year? I suppose it just depends on how you know, the amount of time that you are allocated every week for language learning.
How many units do we have now?
I think we're approaching 30
plus the new ones.
30 plus, I think, 6-week units. So effectively, there are enough units to teach a lesson every week,
from reception to
all the way through the school year for every year group. Certainly in Key Stage 2, and if you're doing it lower down than that, whether it's a UK school or a different type of school, you can get through 5-6 years worth of material just in our resources, teaching one lesson a week. So you've got more than enough, actually.
Most of our schools, now we're going to show how we differ. So as the teacher head,
I'm loving the banter, by the way, between the two of you. It's wonderful.
I've got to sleep in the garden after this.
Let me explain.
Francesca,
The teacher says 6 units, so 1 every half term. Now, Paolo has a lot of contact with the schools and teachers, and the reality is they get through,
I think,
4, 5.
Four is a good number, 4 units a year. So 4 of our 6 lesson units is about average. But Francesca would always like people to try and get through 6. The reality is real life intervenes, particularly in primary school, and we have to be flexible in how much we expect schools to be able to get through.
And also we want them to do it properly. So I don't know if you can see by what we are providing that there is a lot of work, and we don't want them to just rush through the activities. So some of the new units have a lot of activities, and schools get in contact and say, well, if I do everything you suggest, for example, Me in the World, I could probably make it last a term. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. That's absolutely fine. If you do it and you do it properly, because we recycle all the grammar and everything is met multiple times, if they don't meet it in 1 unit, for example, the possessives, just take a grammar point, the possessives is 3 or 4 times in the scheme of work. If they meet it twice and they do it properly, that's plenty for the possessives, actually, because they focus mostly on the my form. They're introduced to the others as well, but the focus is in being able to do it accurately. So what we say is do it properly, take your time, explain, enjoy the experience.
That's what we always say is, you as the teacher drive the resources don't drive you. So you're always in charge. Be guided by the level of challenge and stretch, and also the speed of delivery that works for your class. And don't worry about how much you're getting through. What we need to make sure is that what we are delivering hits home for your audience, so for your class, so that it has an impact with that particular class. Otherwise, chasing, a timetable, or thinking you have to get through a certain amount of resource in a certain amount of time, and it not landing with your class is just a waste of time. So always be driven by what's going in, and don't worry about what's still to come.
I think, if anything, we've got probably too much material. I mean, there is a lot. So for any of you that are interested, I mean, you can take a free trial at the end, no obligation, but there is a lot of material. And the questions we have at the moment are all about the organisation of the schemes of work and the unit planners. So we organise by early learning, intermediate and progressive. And there are some units at the same level within a teaching type. So for example, fruits and vegetables, I would put more or less in early learning at the same level. Animals and instruments are easier than fruits and vegetables, for example.
I think if you go to the next few slides, we'll start getting into the actual,
the actual units. So, any more questions?
No, that's it so far. This is, sorry, Jocelyn again has said, are there any videos too?
Right, videos are, in terms of songs, we've got videos coming where the song lyrics are like a karaoke. Do you mean children talking to children, or?
So, she says yes,
not,
or
not
we, she said.
Not at the moment, but
okay.
Obviously at Language Angels, things are evolving all the time. And those of you that have been with us for a few years will know that things have changed a lot in the last few years. So at the moment, we don't, but that doesn't mean that we won't have eventually. For example, at the moment it's a teaching tool where we're really looking at how to teach the language to the children. So the focus was on the resources and helping teachers with primary pedagogy, whether that be non-specialist delivery or whether it be secondary teachers going into primary, because even that can be quite challenging, because I've done that myself. So the beginning was quite hard when we had the primary project where we would go into primary schools and teach, and that was really where I had to learn how to teach primary. I knew my languages obviously, but teaching in primary was a whole new ball game. Right, so we can skip this one because I think we've kind of talked about it to death really, about this, about determined target. So whatever you're using in whichever country, whatever your targets are, be careful. If they are vague, like the ones that I showed you, they need unpicking and they need rewording. They're there for a reason. As I said, I don't dislike our 12 attainment targets because it means that I have freedom. By not giving me a topic, I have been able to write units around World War II. We've got something on Vikings coming. We've written on planets. We've written on all kinds of things. Had I been given a list of topics or vocabulary, that would have been harder for me. Now we have what we call our core language. So of course we have the units on presenting myself, and we have units on numbers and colours, and we have units on my home, clothes, I'm trying to think, pets. But then we have a lot of creative curriculum, because the creative curriculum allows you to teach skills and grammar and vocabulary through a different medium, and they won't meet it when they go to secondary. And that's what we're trying to do at Language Angels, build these skills, and when they go to secondary and they learn the possessive again, or they have the verb to be to have, they get it, they're correct, first of all, that they're accurate, but they understand. But when it's taught in a different topic, they don't feel like they're doing it again. So those of you that have taught secondary will know that sometimes the primary children come through and they say, oh, I've done that. And they haven't done it. They've seen it. They might have been exposed to it. But actually, their knowledge of the language is very basic. And that's what we're trying to change, that they actually have really good skills that they can actually transfer from language to language. So how do we help teachers? Well, we produce a progression map, which is not about the attainment targets. The progression map is about our teaching types and our units and our skills, and showing how, as they move from early learning through the, I mean, we haven't given you all the sheets, obviously it's longer than this.
It's 12 pages.
12 pages. When they move through the units, it shows you how they progress and this building of skills, how they move across a teaching type. There's obviously progression, and then we have another ladder, the rungs on the ladder, as they move through intermediate, and then they go to progressive. So progression for us is in all directions, and then when it all comes together is when you can really see what's happening. Now, we're going to show you what it looks like in a unit. So up until now, I've talked about kind of where our thinking is, our methodology, our pedagogy. I've shown you what the difference in teaching types is, so the big picture. So somebody that's brought into Language Angels, where they start at the very beginning and where they end at the very end. What I'm going to look at now is I'm going to look at two units in particular, and I wanted to show you what it could look like from lesson to lesson. So breaking it down again into this minute detail and showing how they build skills within lesson and unit. And then obviously as they would complete more units across a year. So again, we've missed out intermediate, and we always miss it out just for time really. And it would be obviously in between fruit and school. I didn't want to bore you, so I just took out the intermediate unit. Right, so the fruit unit again is the early learning teaching type. Now, as I said, it would be one of the first units that they are exposed to. We are just about to launch 2 units, one on greetings and one on numbers and colours. And they are aimed at nursery and those really early years, and they have very little writing. This would be a unit that can be taught earlier than our year 3, and we said that was what, age 7, 8, yeah. But it assumes that they have some basic reading and writing skills to accompany what we're doing on the slides here. So in lesson 1, they are learning 5 fruits. We've only shown you 2 because we would never give them all 5 at the beginning of the lesson. We would do it very slowly and carefully. Now, our lessons are half an hour. Sometimes at this particular age group, sometimes people say to us, can you get through everything? Well, you can when it's been prepared. So how many slides? I think Paolo always complains about the number of slides.
I think this lesson, I think that's 30 slides.
30 slides. But what we're trying to do is support the teacher. And if you have a very competent, very experienced linguist, for example, they might decide to skip a few slides. But if you have someone in their early stages of their career, even a linguist, who might not have taught primary, might not have the experience behind them, I can assure you that it's very reassuring to have everything in one place for them to be able to deliver with. So this is just showing you that although they're going to learn 5 fruits, the fruits are introduced gradually. Normally, the first 2 lessons in a unit, which is 6 weeks, would be the input of vocabulary. We try and categorize by gender where appropriate and if possible, especially in the early years when it is much more based on nouns and articles and determinism. I must remember to use the word determinism. But obviously with fruits, most of them are feminine, but if we can, we categorize by gender. So
I was just going to say actually to Jocelyn from earlier on,
yep.
The speaker icons you can see on the screen is where the target language is played. I don't know if we're sharing audio. I'm not sure if they can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear that fine. That's great.
Okay.
So just as an example, that's how we present our audio for teachers to use in class.
Okay, so there would be a PowerPoint presentation with all the methodology and pedagogy, and the staff that required it would have a support printout that they could print off from the website, which has a slide-by-slide breakdown, which they could look over before the lesson in terms of preparation, but everything would be there prepared for them. They wouldn't actually have to do anything. They could adapt it, of course, or they could keep it exactly as it is. So in lesson 1, you have the presentation of the 5 fruits, followed by a series of activities. So here are the 5 fruits that they would learn in the first lesson. And with these 5 fruits, there would be a multitude of very fast, quick games, matching, listening, reading, and there would be a variety of worksheets that could be completed after the interactive presentation, which is the most important part. And I always say that when teachers start off with primary language learning, they can't believe how many times you have to repeat the same word. So what we're trying to do is vary the activities, vary the way the presentations are, so that the pupils are exposed to the language multiple times, and then it can put it into short-term and then long-term memory. Now today is not about brain science, but there's a whole presentation that we do about how they learn, how you learn languages. Now there's a question that I can see. Do children do writing?
Yeah, there's 2
yes,
questions.
They do.
Yeah, there's 2 questions that have come
2.
up. We've got are the teaching types equivalent to year groups, e.g. early language, year 3, intermediate, year 4, progressive, year 5? And then, as you said, do children do writing in all year groups, or do you leave it to the older children?
No, they have writing in all year groups.
So going back to the first question first, broadly, the teaching types do match with those key stage 2 years. So early language would be for year 3, for example, UK year 3. Intermediate would cover years 4 and 5, and progressive years 6. However, that's all based on language Lego, as I always refer to it. You can't teach progressive in year 6 just because the kids are in year 6. The kids in year 6 can do progressive units if they've had some sensible amount of foreign language teaching in previous years, because those foundations have to be in place. So if year 6 have had 3 previous years of foreign language taught to them, by all means jump straight into progressive. If they haven't, then it's going to be too much of a stretch, and we're going to do more harm than good. So we have to be very careful how we pitch.
Just on that point, Paolo, Yolanda said, can we access the early learning if we already have an account with Language Angels?
Yes, the subscription to Language Angels, Yolanda, gives you access to everything.
Great.
So the new units that will be coming on will be added in, and we'll be sending emails out to users so you know where to find them. Okay,
and then we've got a question from Christine, a classic thing that would happen all the time when I was teaching at middle school level, which is, what happens if you have a child that joins you in year 6? What would you sort of suggest as a way to help them catch up?
Like the homeschool.
Yeah,
is what I would suggest at that point. I mean, I would still, it all depends if they've got staff, if they can get to a computer.
I mean, I think it depends, but obviously we're assuming there's a differential in their level of whatever language is being taught to the rest of the class. It would then be a case of, it's not always easy, but we would have to try and give them some work to do outside of class, probably, to try and build up some of those core skills if they're
early
lacking.
learning units.
And we do have, whether it's access to the resources through the school site or through the homeschool site, there are options that you can use to build those foundations as quickly as possible with pupils that are at a different sort of stage in learning to their peers in the classroom.
I mean, they should always be exposed to the lesson, but the problem is that if they don't have the basic skills, they'd be limited in what they can reproduce on their own afterwards. So when we're asking the children to do some of the tasks that I showed you previously, if they haven't had the early learning experience, they would struggle with being able to cope with that amount. I am assuming that they have no language knowledge behind them, because if they've done another language, you'd be quite surprised at how they can cope. So say they've done Spanish in a previous school, even if they've just had a little bit of basic Spanish, they would probably be able to not catch up, but they would be able to manage. But with language angels, you have everything, the whole package. So it would be, in terms of what staffing you could.
I think even with our the methodology, the pedagogy we encourage schools to use is that the whole lesson is taught to the whole class.
Everybody.
And we then differentiate the activities
Outcomes.
We expect various pupils to do with the language they presented with. So it's one lesson, but for each lesson we provide, for example, worksheet activities, and those will be differentiated to 3 different levels of challenge and ability. So you can pick the sort of level of work you want individual pupils to do based on their understanding of what's being taught. And that also applies back to, I think it was Christina's question about writing. Yes, writing, all of the skills actually are taught in all of the units. It just depends. I mean, here's a good example.
This is our less challenge
so this
worksheet.
Is an early language unit worksheet. It's a very, very basic writing exercise, but it is a writing exercise. As we go through the rest of this presentation, you'll see a much more sophisticated, much more challenging writing exercise for our progressive units. So it's all skills taught in all units at all levels of challenge. Just the level of complexity of the concepts being delivered to pupils and what we're asking them to do with it increases as the level of challenge increases.
So for example, this would be our less challenge worksheet. The standard challenge would have a gap fill where there'd be letters missing, and obviously the staff member could, or the teacher could play the fruit on the board, and they could try and sound it out. We've just launched our new phonics package as well, to try and encourage the children to sound out what they're hearing. And then the more challenge would have no word box at all, and they would be expected to try and reproduce that based on what they had seen during the interactive presentation part of the lesson, the teaching part of the lesson. Lesson 2, just a random slide again, another 5 fruits are introduced, because what we want them to have by the end of the unit is a bank of 10 fruits, 10 common fruits. So they revise the 5 from the previous week, so always recycling. So we recycle before we add on the new vocabulary. They're introduced to the 5 fruits. Here they are in lesson 2. And then by lesson 3, so if I just go back one, sorry, I'm going quite fast. In lesson 2, same kind of idea, different activities, but we start now to work on all 10 fruits. So from week 1 and 2, and there are, for example, in the worksheet sections, some word puzzles and crosswords and word searches. So focusing on the noun and the gender. And there would be an article sort in lesson 2 as well. So making sure that they're aware that there are 2 masculine. When we get to lesson 3, we're moving them from singular to plural. And the idea here is that they understand in their own language, as well as in French, that when you say, I like apples, it's in plural form, not I like apple. And we would expect that to be explored in English and literacy, because we're tying in with literacy all of the time through the scheme. Because if they can find these patterns and language makes sense, then again, they can transfer these skills. And yes, sometimes languages work differently, and that's great, but sometimes they're the same. There are as many similarities as there are differences. So we do a little bit of work, and it's very visual. So although that slide is in the lesson, most of the lesson is working on the visuals. And we say that, you know, if it's possible to bring in real fruit into the lesson, then to do that, let the children hold it, let them understand, you know, with flashcards, for example. And we are really getting them to listen to the article/determiner, making sure that they can hear, especially in French, because they won't hear the end of the noun, which is the silent letter. And we spend a whole lesson exploring that before we go to lesson 4. So now by lesson 4, we've got our 10 fruits. We've looked at what happens when they go to plural. We've explored the fact that sometimes you can't hear if it's plural at the end of the word. So you need to look at the word that goes before. And we start to introduce the opinions. And the whole lesson is talking about positive, Then the following lesson, we go to negative, and the whole time, the 10 fruits are being mentioned all of the time. And then they do a survey in the last lesson. And then our lesson after here, we've just shown some of the worksheets again. You're talking about writing. The more challenge would not have this section. This would be removed. And for the little ones, we talk about cutting these out and sticking them in and making it visual. I mean, I know that's not possible at the moment with the restrictions, but it could be sent home, for example, or put on websites to be downloaded.
I was going to say, so that really, in a nutshell, is one unit.
Yeah. And then the assessment
five
in the
lessons
final week.
from one of our early language units, showing how we move from lesson 1, where we start looking at just 5 fruits as a noun plus determiner or article, and then building on that for another 5 the next lesson. We then look about making singular into plural, so we can start to see progress. Then we look at opinions, adding complexity to the language that's being taught, progress again. And then again, all of that is consolidated by the end of the unit, showing manipulation of language, whether it's understanding of the unit, of the fruits themselves, how to express an opinion, how to put all of those little blocks of language knowledge together into a longer, more complex phrase. And we're starting to build our language Lego model. And that's just one unit, just early language.
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
And I've seen actually
progress.
the survey lesson, and the kids just love it because they feel like they're almost empowered, that they've got this language, and they're going around saying what they like and they don't like. Now, this is lesson 5. We've been saying there are 6 lessons. Yeah. When they get to lesson 6, there is an assessment / revision / peer consolidation. So we don't leave it there. Once they have that knowledge, we go over everything again in that final lesson, and we give the opportunity for an assessment should schools need to provide data or documentation or talk about who's on target, below target, for example. The option is there. Now, in the new reception early learning, we've been debating all week, and we're not doing any assessment for the really little ones. We're just doing 6 teaching lessons.
So I'm just conscious of time. So
right, I knew you were going to say that. Right, so
you're all good. It's all good. It's amazing.
I told you. Right, so quickly, this is where I'm going to shock you all. We're going to fast forward 4 years minimum. Right, so we're assuming a school is set up. They've had language angels. Lots of our schools teach earlier than year 3, but let's just assume your standard model is they've started about age 7, and we're now going to go to age 11, 12, which is 10, 11, which is our end of Key Stage 2, the end of primary phase. So the unit is school. Lesson 1, they're going to do all 10 noun and article determiners in one hit, and they finish the lesson with I study. So we're not breaking up the vocabulary. The first lesson is here's the vocabulary for the unit. They would be given their vocabulary sheet, and there's lots of vocab in this unit. So we would probably show them what it is as well as learning it as we go through. Lesson 2 would be starting with 4 opinions, but then by the time they end the lesson, they are doing role play presentations about what they like and don't like. Often we provide the information before we ask them to go solo, because sometimes, I'm sure it's happened to you, it takes them longer to decide what they like and they don't like than actually do the task.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is get them to practice the language. We don't want any time wasted. So we give them the character, and then if they can do this, we move them to going solo and say, right, now, what do you like? What do you not like? But we normally provide a scaffold first, just to avoid the children taking too long to make the decisions, and we let them make the decisions after this. As they get to the final year, we put in lots of challenge. So depending on what the teaching and learning has been like up until year 6, most schools could probably get to this stage where in lesson 2 they're beginning to put these things together, and that would be because they've probably encountered some of the language before. So by lesson 2 they're already saying what their favorite subject is, they're saying why, and they're adding on an adjective. Lesson 3, we start to introduce time. Now this is not one lesson, that's it, time is done. This is an introduction to time, and we let them have it on the hour because they know their numbers. What we're trying to do is give them lots of language to use by the end of the unit to talk about school. So we're giving them the option that they could talk about lessons being at particular hours during the day. We then go to lesson 4, where we introduce the verb. Now, I always suggest focusing on the first person singular. This is an irregular verb. It's what I classify a high frequency. I think it's fine to introduce verbs. You would know if the class was ready to have a look at whole verb conjugation, and there is a PowerPoint with exercises. I wouldn't just give them the verb and say this is what it is. There's a whole process where we talk about the personal pronouns, and we lead them into, and we go over in English first what a verb is. We take nothing for granted. There will be some children in the class, I know we don't want to think like that with year 6, but there will be some that need a little reminder of what a verb is, and then by the end of the lesson they could definitely be able to repeat this part, but they would start to understand that changes happen. And I always say it's not about learning the verb off by heart. If they manage to do that, that is fantastic. But it's about understanding that verbs are a little bit more tricky in foreign languages because they change so much. And by seeing the English and the French side by side, we can highlight that actually there aren't a lot of changes. What would it be like, for example, a French student, pupil the same age learning English? They'd have a different experience, and we are learning this, but you know, languages are different in different languages work differently. So in this case, these change more on this side than they do on this side, and obviously there would be work on pronunciation here as well. By lesson 5, we give them a scaffold. We support them because we know that it would be extremely difficult for them to be able to do that all off by heart. And they're writing an email. We give them an email template, and they start to write about school, and they have as much or as little support as they want, because there's a graded format with this as well, and they have their vocabulary sheet that they had at the beginning of the lesson, and they can start to put their words together because they understand sentence structure. They know where to go to find things, and they start to understand in their own mother tongue as well what conjunction is, and they start to make these connectors. And here we have the opinions again. And again, then in lesson 6, there would be a revision and an assessment should teachers wish. Now, through every progressive unit, there would always be this end presentation, email task, oral presentation, all presented in different formats, but getting them to actually use the language. What do we want them to do by the end of school topic? We want them to be able to say what subjects they study at school from the selection that we offer them. We want them to say what subjects they like and they don't like, say and write, obviously. We want them to recognize that language as well. And we want them possibly to add on the opinion and the time, for example. I can see.
I think that's wonderful. We've got a couple of things that have come in. So we've got, do you know whether any of your schools have been through an Ofsted deep dive? Great question. In languages using your schemes of work. If so, how did it go?
Very well.
Yeah. I'm not surprised.
Yes, very well. The only thing we have, sorry, Paolo, is that we always say Language Angels has it all there, but the staff need to understand, you know, what we're talking about today, how it works. It's not, I mean, you can just take the lesson and teach, obviously, but if you don't know the long-term plan, and what's been really nice for us recently is the contact with head teachers, because we're saying that it's not just the class teacher's job. The head teachers need to know what they're learning in the language. They don't need to understand the actual mechanics of language learning, but they do need to understand what units are and the progression.
That's what came up from the schools that have had deep dives in languages. There are two parts of what we do that seem to help quite a lot. Obviously, the resources that we've demonstrated here today provide the material that's useful and required for good delivery in class. Beside that, for subject leads and for schools as a whole, we also provide a whole curriculum guidance section, which provides all of the documentation schools need to develop their whole school vision for primary foreign languages, and then not just develop it, but then to implement it and evidence its impact. So the 3 key words that Ofsted are looking for in their new inspection framework, those 3 I's of intent, implementation, and impact. We provide all of the documentation to ensure that that happens, because particularly with a deep dive, what they're looking for is not just excellent delivery in class, but it's that the whole school has an understanding of
absolutely.
the approach the school is taking to foreign language teaching, where the beginning part of the journey is, where the end is, and making sure that all of that is done in a way that has positive impact for pupils. And encouragingly, actually, from my perspective, they've also put quite a bit of focus on this all being done in a way that doesn't break teachers.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's quite nice to see that there is that whole making sure that teachers have the required amount of support, whether that's through schemes of work or time, whatever it is, from SLT, to make sure they can deliver excellent language lessons, but without having to kill themselves at the same time.
Because we're only half the package, aren't we? So we can give you the resources and we can explain to you how we believe it works best at primary, and we can put the language and but you have to deliver it. So the class teacher is on this journey with the children, but if they don't know what's happening at the end of the unit, at the very least, that will be a very different delivery than we would envisage when we're writing the unit. So yes, we've done all, I mean, it takes a long time to make the units and to plan out and to think about what we want the children to do. But we are expecting the staff delivering to at least print off the unit overview, the objectives of the unit, and to understand what the children are heading towards. And the whole idea of all the documentation, for example, the learning intention sheets, is that when that is displayed in week 1 on the interactive board, and the teacher says, we are going to learn how to, for example, say what fruits we like and we don't like, and here are our little steps, everybody's starting in the same place and we're moving together. But the teacher should understand, the staff member delivering should understand what the end point is, the end goal, because they might be able just to say it in that moment to the children, but I think they really need to understand what the process is over those 6 weeks. They don't have to plan anything. All of the lesson plans are done, but they do have to understand what the objective and the end goal is. And that way the class can move to that end goal. Because when I think we've observed lessons, it's very obvious when a teacher isn't really clear what the children, in any subject actually, what the children are supposed to be doing. They might be doing that task because they're following instructions. But if I was to take everything away and ask the children what they just learnt, be very interesting to hear the children's answers actually. And that has happened before. So we want everybody to really understand what the end goal is for each unit. Because also the problem is in schools in the UK, for example, a member of staff might be teaching class in year 3, for example, but then they've got a teacher in year 4 that's maybe never taught language angels, for example, and never taught a language, and maybe an NQT. And so the class have had a year of language learning, and they're now being taught by a member of staff that doesn't have, and we're saying actually that can be done. It can be done and it can be done well, but you need to have your support system in place.
Yeah, and I think the structure that you're giving teachers here is just fantastic. But yeah, obviously it's down to how those instructions are then interpreted and how it's delivered. We've just got one more question, if that's okay, around differentiation. So Maria has asked, in terms of differentiation, would you let the children decide what level they want to work at, or would that be would you let the children decide what level they want to do, or would you set the children? So in other words, is it the children who are sort of through their own agency, as it were, choose what level they're working at, or would that be the expectation that the teacher would decide the level that they're working at?
It varies in terms of the experience we've had with the schools that use our resources. We've seen both approaches taken. The differentiated worksheets we provide aren't labelled. They're labelled for the teacher, so they know which ones they are, but the children don't know which level they're being pitched. So I've actually seen it happen in a class. They put 3 piles of worksheets out and let the kids choose. And just by looking at the amount of support each worksheet provides, children will find something that they're comfortable with, and more often than not, they'll try and push themselves a little bit, which is ideal. If you're in a situation,
I love that. That's great. Yeah, I love that. That's great. Sorry, I just interrupted you, but I love that what you just said. Let the children decide the level. Yeah, that's great.
Exactly. So, and there's also other times we've had teachers, and I've been in class and seen it happen, where a teacher has actually guided pupils to the particular worksheet they want them to do. And when I've asked about it after, it's been that this child can do this level, They just need to believe more in themselves that they can do it. So it swings and roundabouts. I personally prefer the first option, but again, like we always say, you as teachers know your classes better than we do. Yeah. So that's why we provide it, and it's up to you.
And we provide answers as well. So we provide the worksheets, but then we give answers that the worksheets, if you want to then show examples on the board, for example, on the interactive, or if teachers want to mark them, correct them. Everything is very quick though. We're not giving anything that's going to take hours to mark afterwards. And as I said, if there is a linguist, and we have now a 60-40 split, so 60% is non-linguist and non-specialist delivery, but we have a growing number of linguists, about 40%, and it's growing, because they need to have something in place, especially in the situation we find ourselves in now, that planning for remote teaching and learning is really hard. And you need somewhere where you've got a listening already prepared with a question sheet and an answer sheet, and things that you can use to teach. And even if you are doing the video and the online and the live teaching, you still need resources. It's very difficult when you're working remotely with a board, or you need to be able to screen share. And we have allowed our schools to continue. And that, I think, has been really successful for us, that the schools have been able to continue with language learning. We were nervous at the beginning, thinking, will language teaching carry on, or will it be something schools decide? And it was the opposite, because we had everything in place. The only thing we had to do was create the homeschool, which we were lucky enough our developers were able to do for us. Are there questions?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's really good to hear. That's really reassuring to hear that it was so valuable, the resource that the language learning was allowed to carry on.
Yeah, our experience is very different actually to what we were reading on social media, where they were saying that lessons weren't happening. We had the opposite, where teachers were saying, you've got to help us because we're doing lessons, but we're finding it hard with the audio. So we had to create the homeschool so that the children could access the audio outside of the lesson.
Fantastic. We just got a question around speaking, if that's okay, from Guillaume, which is, does Language Angels feature conversational activities apart from surveys?
Yes. So we've done lots of role play activities. So where, I don't know if you saw can I go back, shall I? Where we had Karim, we've got lots of these, and they're on the slides, but they're also in worksheets where we're doing A and B for less challenge, and the more challenge will have like 4 characters. And again, providing all the information, and they have to be the person, or they have to follow the instructions and do it normally in pair work. So it's not just surveys. And as they're reading in the mother tongue gets stronger, then they're able to do these activities more easily. But yes, and you can do this on the interactive or as a printout. Maybe
that's great.
One between 2, for example.
Thank you. It's always it's a vital skill, obviously.
Yes.
And so and it's very nice to see it, and obviously the teachers know best, that when children start speaking to each other, how they encourage each other to come out of their shells and really go for it with their spoken French. So it's good to see, for Spanish or whichever language it is.
And this would happen at the point in the unit or the lesson where they have done they've covered this already, and then the teacher would be free to listen and move around the classroom as they have their 5 minutes doing their pair work activity.
Lovely, really lovely. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, there was
we sort of got about another. Well, I think we've covered we covered all the questions that we've had so far. I don't know. We've got officially about another 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to I'm just going to quickly show you, and it really is going to be quick because we don't have time, how we help evidence progression at Language Angels. This is through our tracking and progression tool. Now I'm just going to show you a couple of stills, screenshots, and then I'm literally going to take 30 seconds, and then we'll take some more questions. But it's what we do to help evidence that progression has taken place is we've built our bespoke tracking and progression tool, and it does 2 things. It tracks pupil and class progress against the attainment targets, in this case, the English attainment targets from the DFE. But then, as we've said all the way through this presentation, more importantly, it monitors and tracks progress of pupils across those key skills that we've been talking about all the way through today. And we do that through end of unit assessments, which are in lesson 6 of our units. Each child fills in their own question sheet. We look at speaking, listening, reading and writing, plonk the data into the tracking tool, and then what it does is all of this happens automatically in the back end. It will track the journey of a pupil all the way through your school with the language learning. And we have a traffic light system checklist against the specific attainment targets. And the colour of the tick represents a number of different levels of challenge a particular attainment target has been met at. So red, it's been met at 1 level of challenge, orange has been met at 2 levels of challenge, green at 3. So the aim is by the end of their time in your school, all the ticks are green. And then you also have their full history of all of their progress and development in the various language learning skills the whole time they're in your school. So at all times, pupils themselves know, and you as the teaching experts know where pupils are in their language learning journey and how they're developing in each of those key skills. So this information can be fed back into your planning for the next unit you're going to teach and the skills you're going to focus on. Promise you it was going to be quick. That's
can I just ask on that point? So are those digital sheets that you're filling in digitally, or are those sort of paperwork sheets sheets that the teacher's filling in?
They are currently paper sheets filled in by pupils, and then they are entered digitally by teachers. The scores are entered digitally into the tracker, and everything else happens then in the background automatically. We are working on developing a digital sheet for pupils to complete, and that will be coming out in our next launch of our revised scheme, probably around Christmas time.
And also, if they're not following the programme of study attainment targets that we have here, it wouldn't matter because the assessment sheets also give you a score. So you could still have a score at the end of the unit if you wished. You wouldn't have to then necessarily plug it into the back end that creates the programme study attainment targets data, but you would still be able to have data should you want to use the assessment sheets, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine. We've got a really interesting question sort of around cultural context, if it's okay, from Guillaume, which is, so he said, he started off by saying, I wonder if characters could fit cultural context. And he goes on to say, not only characters, but content. Could this be changed by teachers? So he's from the, New Zealand, I think, from what he said. Okay. We have very little or no resources in New Zealand that are New Zealand centric for primary schools. But I would imagine it seems to be that you're providing PowerPoint. So presumably the teacher could adapt them if they wanted to find other images of characters that were more, country specific. But I know that for people that create textbooks, this sort of thing can be a nightmare in the sense that the types of character you choose might be offensive to one group of people, or an activity that character is doing, particularly say in the Middle East. You mentioned, Paolo, at the beginning about going to the Middle East. I know you have to be very sensitive to any sort of depiction of characters. I just wondered if you had a response to any of that.
Because what we've currently done has predominantly been UK based, obviously that's where we've taken our cultural content and context from. But it's an excellent point that Guillaume has raised, actually. I think the more we start to work with schools outside of the UK, we can certainly adjust the characters and content that we're providing to better match the requirements of that particular country, the schooling in that country. In terms of enabling PowerPoints to be editable by teachers, it's a tricky one, because what tends to happen is, because we're quite structured in what we're trying to get across in each of our units and what we've gone through today, if teachers start to edit wholesale PowerPoints, then we can't with any kind of certainty ensure that the key language learning skills are being met as we would like them to be met and built upon gradually going through those 6-week units. And so therefore that's always a bit of a tricky area, but certainly we can adjust content, characters.
And we have had to do that.
We have done that to better match the requirements of schools in a particular country.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. Well, I'm really impressed, because I obviously knew of Language Angels, but I had no idea of all the things that you do. I just love the structure and the rigor and the progression. It's just brilliant. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been really interesting.
Thank you for letting us share the time with you.
That's okay.
I mean, we've got our details on the screen.
Please follow us on social media.
So our YouTube channel isn't great. We're gonna be watching Joe's. So that'd be
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. Go to Joe's YouTube, but everywhere else, come to us.
No problem. We've got one more question, but it's okay.
Sure.
So Maria has said, will the paper copies still be available after you relaunch at Christmas, as some schools do not have the capacity
Yes,
to go
absolutely.
paperless yet?
Yes, absolutely. Everything we do, we will always give. We'll never take options away.
No,
We will add extra options on, but there will always be options to cover as many possibilities and as many different levels of budget as possible in terms of making sure that schools can access all the resources in a way that suits them best.
And we're always here if people have any questions. The one thing we want to be is personable. So if there are any questions, or if there's another webinar that they'd like, you, Joe, to organise on something specific, we're here. So
yeah, I'd love to. That'd be great, actually. In a couple of months' time, maybe, or after Christmas, we could have a think of another webinar.
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be great.
We like doing it. I like Francesca telling me off in public.
I've been good today. I've been good. I'm not that.
People that have been to our seminar webinars before, they know she's been on her best behaviour today.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Okay, so I think if it's okay, if everyone turns on their microphones, not necessarily the webcams as well, and we just give Francesca and Paolo a very much deserved round of applause. That was really fantastic. There's been some lovely comments as well about thanking you. But I think we've covered all the questions. But that was just great. So let's have a round of applause, everyone. That was amazing.
Come in, please fire them up. We're happy to answer
people.
Yeah, that's lovely. If you want to turn your webcams on, I don't know if you want to stop sharing your screen. Obviously, we're still recording now, but if people are happy to turn on their webcams,
oh wow,
feel free to do so. There we are. I'll turn on my video as well. There we are, still here. That was lovely.
That's my colleague from all those years ago.
I can see you. You've not aged at all.
No.
What a thing to say. No, that was really fabulous. That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. Just
thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to all of you for having attended, obviously, and for the questions. When we do these, we always say it makes a massive difference when there's live interaction, because it helps us tweak what we're doing, and being able to answer your questions gives us ideas for what we want to do going forward too. So thank you.
No, that's wonderful. And obviously we're recording this now. We're going to put the recording onto YouTube. So for those people that weren't able to come live, they'll be able to experience the recording. And I'm sure you'll be welcoming their questions or anything else they want to know about. That's just brilliant. Okay. Wow. Oh, great. Right. So that was just wonderful. So I'm going to stop recording now, if it's okay with everyone. Sure. And just stop now.